On a cool September morning in 2008, people in charcoal suits carried cardboard boxes out of a glass tower on 7th Avenue. Inside those boxes were desk plants, family photos, coffee mugs with the company logo. Outside, there was a silence that didn't belong to New York. It felt like the end of a play where no one knew when to clap. The name on the building, Lehman Brothers, had been part of Wall Street since the age of steam. And now it was over. To understand how a 158-year-old firm could vanish in a weekend, you have to understand a spell the modern world cast on itself, the belief that risk could be engineered out of existence. In the years before the crash, the American dream had a soundtrack. A real estate boom, granite countertops, mortgage approvals stamped like concert tickets, and a line that only went up. Banks discovered that home loans weren't loans anymore. They were ingredients. Chop them, mix them, repackage them, sell them. Somewhere in that alchemy, danger became a spreadsheet cell that always summed to safe. Lehman Brothers was not alone in playing this symphony, but it played it loud. It started in the 1850s selling cotton. It survived wars, panics, depressions. By the 1990s, it had become an investment bank with a taste for the edges where innovation blurs into appetite. The CEO, Richard Fuld, sharp profile, jaw like a verdict, was called the gorilla of Wall Street. He believed in offense. He believed market share was destiny. He believed that size meant safety and speed meant survival. The instrument of the era was the mortgage, not as a promise to pay, but as a raw material. A neighborhood's worth of home loans could be bundled into a mortgage-backed security, a bond whose payments came from thousands of monthly checks. Then the magic trick. Take slices of many bonds, mix the highest and lowest quality pieces, and create collateralized debt obligations. Models said the odds of a nationwide drop in housing were tiny, like snow in August. If one town faltered, another would thrive. Diversification would save the day. Lehman bought these loans. It securitized them. It invested in them. And it borrowed heavily to hold more and more of them. The ratio of borrowed money to its own cushion, leverage, grew so high that a 3-degree wobble looked like an earthquake. But in an up market, leverage feels like genius. Profits soared. Bonuses soared higher. Inside the glass towers, people spoke in a dialect of spreads and tranches, VAR and basis points. Outside, on cul-de-sacs baked by the Sunbelt heat, brokers handed out loans like candy at a parade. There was a second trick. The loans themselves changed character. Once, to get a mortgage, you needed a stack of pay stubs and the patience of a saint. Now you needed a pulse. No doc loans, liar loans, teaser rates. If the paperwork made the numbers look right for 30 days, the loan could be sold into a pool and stop being a bank's problem. Risk had a new home, the capital markets. And the capital markets trusted the ratings. Glossy letters stamped by firms that said, with the confidence of a notarized promise, AAA. The safest of the safe. Lehman wanted more. It bought mortgage lenders. It expanded its balance sheet with real estate bets that didn't just touch the fire, they were made of fire. It thrived in a world where banks borrowed short and invested long, where liquidity was a law of nature and refinancing was forever. If you asked the people whose job it was to worry, the chief risk officers, the regulators, they would point to spreadsheets that glowed green. In a decade of calm seas, even the waves look generous. But storms don't ask for permission. In 2006, cracks appeared at the edges of the country. Small defaults from borrowers who never should have qualified. In 2007, an obscure lender called New Century collapsed. The alphabet soup of structured finance began to taste bitter. Mezzanine tranches, CP conduits, SIVs. A hedge fund at Bear Stearns went under. Sitting in conference rooms that smelled like confidence and carpet cleaner, executives said it was contained. Housing, after all, never falls everywhere at once. By the spring of 2008, Bear Stearns itself was gone, sold in a rushed weekend to prevent a meltdown. It should have been a siren. Instead, it was a lesson in moral hazard. If things got truly ugly, belief went, Washington would blink. Lehman kept marching. Its executives spoke in public with the calm of surgeons. They emphasized liquidity and capital ratios. They sold a few assets, raised some cash, smiled for television. Behind the glass, the reality hardened. Lehman's level 3 assets, the things you valued because there was no market to tell you otherwise, were huge. If you had to sell them in a hurry, you wouldn't like the price. If you couldn't sell them at all, you wouldn't like the truth. And there's a photo from the summer of 2008. Dick Fuld in a crisp suit, eyes set forward, jaw locked. He looks like a man who believes he's still in the first act. But markets compress time. Weeks become days, become hours. The cost to insure Lehman's debt, a barometer of fear, rose like mercury in a fever. Trading partners began to ask for more collateral, then more, then too much. When you borrow overnight, the night can kill you. Lehman needed a savior. It courted Korean banks. It courted Barclays. It tried to carve out the bad pieces and sell the good. Regulators invited all of Wall Street to a meeting in a giant room. The scene felt like a disaster movie. CEOs in shirt sleeves, phones on speaker, plans sketched on legal pads while the clock thundered. The message from the U.S. Treasury and the Federal Reserve was both clear and incredible: no bailout. After Bear Stearns, after years of privatized gains and socialized rescue, this time the street would have to save itself. The weekend failed. Barclays needed a guarantee the British government wouldn't grant. The numbers at Lehman wouldn't hold still. By midnight, the illusion was gone. On Monday morning, September 15, 2008, Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy. 4,600 pages of legal language later, a symbol had become a statistic. It was the largest bankruptcy in American history. But this is not a story about one firm. It's a story about confidence, the invisible architecture that holds the modern world together. Confidence is what makes a cashier accept your card, a bank accept your collateral, a market accept your bond. When Lehman fell, confidence cracked across continents. Money market funds, the dull, safe place for corporate cash, broke the buck, returning less than $1 for $1 invested. Commercial paper, the short-term IOUs that keep companies making payroll and stocking shelves, froze. The plumbing of finance groaned, then seized. In Washington, the debate that had been theoretical became physical. Credit is oxygen. If you remove it, businesses faint. The U.S. government did what modern governments do when the house catches fire. It turned on hoses. The Federal Reserve opened emergency windows, lending against securities it had never touched. The Treasury asked Congress for a war-sized sum to buy troubled assets, TARP, a program with a name that sounded like a tarpaulin stretched over wreckage. After a public outcry, the plan shifted. Instead of buying bad assets at impossible-to-price numbers, the government would inject capital directly into banks. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't fair. It was necessary. Another institution, AIG, staggered, an insurance giant entangled in credit default swaps that paid out if bonds failed. Those swaps, written as if hurricanes never hit in the same season, suddenly owed billions. The government stepped in with a checkbook and a grimace. Across the Atlantic, banks in the UK, Ireland, Iceland, Spain reeled. The crisis was not American, it was global. A decade of global savings had gone looking for yield and found it in subprime alchemy sold with accents from every financial center on Earth. Back in New York, Lehman's building was quiet, but for the footsteps of people who had lost their badges and their future in a single morning. Inside the trading floors, screens flickered with quotes that were now history. In the back offices, teams began the long forensic work of bankruptcy, unwinding positions, reconciling, collateral, discovering where the money had been and where it hadn't. The word counterparty, neutral in textbooks, became intimate, painful. When you do business with everyone, your failure affects everyone. It's tempting to hunt for a single villain in a story this large. There are many candidates. Mortgage brokers who pushed loans to people who couldn't afford them. borrowers who took more than they could carry, rating agencies who blessed rubble with the halo of Chopay, bank executives who mistook leverage for genius, regulators lulled by a decade of calm, politicians who pushed home ownership as a metric of national virtue, hedge funds who surfed the wave until it dumped them, economists whose models confused the past with the future. All of them right. None of them sufficient. Lehman, though, has a special place because it was allowed to fail. The decision still haunts arguments in bars and classrooms. Would saving Lehman have prevented panic? Or was it already too late? What exactly does rescuing a bank rescue? A system or a set of bonuses? The harsh answer is that once a system is this interconnected, no choice is clean. You can teach banks a moral lesson and teach the economy a practical one at the same time. The economy will remember. In the months after the collapse, the language of the crisis moved from headlines to homes. Unemployment rose. Foreclosures spread like ivy. A generation learned words like underwater and short sale the way their grandparents learned rationing. In living rooms, people opened envelopes that recalculated their retirement as a smaller dream. In city halls, budgets shrank. In small towns, Main Street discovered it had always been connected to Wall Street by pipes no one could see. Yet the world did not end. After the panic, programs did what they were supposed to do. The Fed kept rates near zero and promised to hold them there, buying government bonds and mortgage securities in quantities that once would have sounded like sci-fi, quantitative easing, a phrase that eventually became a background hum. Banks were forced to raise capital and take stress tests. Laws changed. Dodd-Frank tightened screws on derivatives, on capital buffers, on resolution plans, how to bury a bank without burying a country. Securitization didn't vanish, but it returned with fewer jagged edges and more footnotes. Some of those footnotes mattered. And Lehman? In the cold light of paperwork, the bankruptcy became a machine of recovery. Assets were sold. Claims were reconciled. Creditors received more back than anyone expected on the Monday of the fall. The logo came down. The building was sold. A lesson hung in the air like dust motes in the shaft of sunlight that cut across the empty trading floor. Liquidity is a promise that lasts exactly until it doesn't. For all the balance sheets and basis points, the human story is what lingers. A risk manager who printed a chart no one wanted to see. A junior trader who called his mother from the sidewalk to say he'd be okay. A couple in a starter home who believed the signature at a closing table meant security. The complicity spread because the benefits were immediate and the costs were delayed. When the bill arrived, it carried interest for everyone. So what do we do with all this? We can start with 3 simple rules, the kind you can write on an index card and keep in a wallet. First, if a business model depends on the permanent availability of cheap short-term funding, it's not a business model, it's a timer. Sooner or later, someone will ask for their money back at the wrong moment. Second, if profits are large, steady, and generated from assets that cannot be priced in an open market, the profits are a story, not a fact. Stories can be true. They can also be rehearsed. Third, if everyone, regulators, ratings, executives, investors, agrees that a particular kind of risk has been abolished, that risk has probably been put in a different costume. Pay attention to the costume changes. There's a moment late in the story after the shouting that belongs in a museum. The Federal Reserve opens a new lending window, an alphabet program with a name that sounds like a crossword clue, and accepts as collateral the very securities that had frozen the system. It is the state stepping into the role the market could not play for itself, a reminder that capitalism is not a perpetual motion machine. It requires maintenance and sometimes emergency surgery. Years later, you can walk past the old Lehman building and see your reflection in the glass. The city is still here. The markets hum with new acronyms. People with fresh badges ride elevators to new floors. Every cycle convinces itself it has learned. And it does learn, just not everything and not forever. The last word belongs to the boxes. When a firm fails, the boxes are what you see. Cardboard is not sentimental. It holds whatever you put in it. A photo of a kid in a Halloween costume, a stack of research that will never become a trade, a coffee mug from a league night bowling team, a pen engraved with a logo that no longer exists. The boxes say, "This was real." The boxes say, "It can happen." The boxes say, "Build systems that imagine the walk to the sidewalk before it starts." Lehman's bankruptcy didn't begin the crisis, it revealed it. It wasn't the first domino, and it wasn't the last. It was the moment the music stopped and everyone realized there had been fewer chairs than players. The lesson is not that risk can be banished. The lesson is that risk, like gravity, is patient. You can stack weight in clever ways for a while. Then one day, the stack remembers the ground. In the decades since, new technologies promise to disperse risk more widely, to make markets smarter, faster, safer. Some of those promises are true. Some are rehearsals of a familiar script. That's the nature of finance, a choreography of optimism, caution, and surprise. The job of memory is to keep the rhythm honest. On that September morning, the people carrying boxes did not look like villains or heroes. They looked like what they were, participants in a system that had mistaken motion for progress and abundance for safety. The city kept moving. The world kept buying and selling. But for anyone who watched that door close behind them, a sentence etched itself into the day. This is what it looks like when the invisible becomes visible. That's Lehman Brothers. Not just a bankruptcy, but a mirror held up to a time when we thought we could turn mortgages into miracles, spreadsheets into shields, and houses into infinite escalators to the sky. The mirror is still there. The choice is whether we look into it only when the next boxes appear on the sidewalk, or every ordinary day while the music is still playing.